Shalom and welcome again to another edition of Seekers of Meaning, the podcast of Jewish Sacred Aging. I'm your host, Rabbi Richard Address. I greatly appreciate you being with us, especially on this very interesting and somewhat bittersweet Seekers of Meaning podcast. This is originally scheduled to be recorded about a month ago with a colleague and friend of mine and former student of mine, Rabbi Dr. Rafael Goldstein, of blessed memory, who passed away towards the middle of last month in December from cancer. And he fought bravely and magnificently up until the end, where even a few days before his death, on a call with some colleagues, he taught a shiur on an aspect of the 23rd Psalm, which leads me to introduce what we're trying to do on this particular podcast with two very distinguished colleagues, Rabbi J.B. Sachs from Congregation Hayam in Ventura, California, and Cantor Rhoda Harrison, Dr. Rhoda Harrison, the Cantor of Congregation M'kor Shalom in beautiful Cherry Hill, New Jersey, who are two of the contributors to the book that Rafael edited, called Psalms in the Key of Healing, subtitled An Interfaith Text Study for Clergy, Chaplains, and People Living with Illness. We had set up this conversation, to be honest with you. Rafael had called me up in the end of October, beginning of November, saying, I think the book is going to be published in January, February. Could we do a podcast on this? Because it's a very exciting project, and it grew out of some of his D-Min work. Sadly, he did not live to see this. And so this is in every way dedicated to his memory, his legacy, and his life. And with the book of Psalms, there perhaps is no better book in the Tanakh to honor him. So thank you all for being with us. JB and Rhoda, thank you very, very much for coming in and helping us out here. So let's delve right into this, because we're dealing with the book of Psalms. And I guess the first question that always intrigued me, and that I want to throw it open to either one of you, is how do you, from your particular perspective, why is the book of Psalms just so universal, so powerful? A go-to book for clergy of all faiths in moments of great joy, in moments of trial, in moments of trauma, in moments of sadness. What is it about this book that holds the heart?
I think my answer is embedded in your question, Richie. The fact that within Psalms, there's every human emotion. Just as you outlined, there's a place for joy. There's a place for sadness. There's a place to acknowledge trauma. There's a place to acknowledge gratitude. I can continue. And I think that's very compelling to people in all phases of leadership and participation.
I agree with Cantor Dr. Rhoda. I also feel that it's very primal, the way that it is written. These are poems and cries from the heart of the different psalmists. I know that traditionally most of the psalms are attributed to King David for a very specific reason, but there's actually no evidence that he wrote any of them personally. And for me, it's a great deal of comforting thinking that they weren't coming from one person, but these were the typical average person that you and I, they are you and me, and they are the typical person we meet, and the typical person we, who are our constituents and the people we try to help and heal. They are the authors of the Psalms. They are, every single person is the author, and because they are so primal and with the needs and hopes and dreams and joys of all of us.
The book Psalms in the Key of Healing is a compilation of Rafael has a huge amount to say in it, but it's also a variety of other authors. Our colleagues, Rabbi Dale Friedman, in addition to Rhoda and JB, Shira Stern, He honored me with an essay in there as well. And the way the book is put together, Rafael asked each of us to sort of like take a look at the psalm and then let it speak to us and how us interpret it in its our own way. And I was reminded, and I'd like to have your reaction to this, the Torah blessing of La Asok B'divrei Torah, that letting the text speak to us. And in the middle of the pandemic, with so much fear, with so much death, with so much sadness, do you think these Psalms are speaking to people in a very, very different way? I mean, I'm fascinated by that word, La Asok, and how the text speaks to us in each generation and in each different moment in our lives. Do you have any comment on that, or how does it speak to you, or how did that Psalm that you did speak to you in this particular period of time? Go ahead, JB, go start off.
So you actually asked so many different questions.
But in
the bracha that you mentioned that we recite for Torah study, I actually focus more on the word Torah. And I know that we Jews often, when we hear the word Torah, focus on the Torah scroll and the first 5 books of our Bible. But the root of the word Torah is from a root Yud Resh He Yara, which means to shoot, to aim. And I think that the Torah is the gift that helps us to find our aim and helps us to aim high in life. And so I think it's a book of guidance and sort of the wisdom of experience and life that we might glean. So when we engage in its text is trying to help us navigate our own lives through the gifts of its experience. And so I think that's what's very powerful for me. And I think it speaks during the pandemic, but it also speaks to, you don't have to wait for a huge moment, whether it's one of pandemic or health or challenge or one of joy. I think it can be used to navigate the daily grind of living just as easily and thoughtfully and beautifully as it has helped all of us through COVID.
Rhoda, how do you react to that? I mean, what JB is saying, and also the La Asok thing.
Right. So actually, and my ear and my heart go to the word La Asok. So it's perfect, actually, that we can balance each other, because whenever I'm teaching, for me, the verb, the engagement, the entangling with, the wrapping ourselves with is very powerful to me. And it actually is what brings me to text. And I actually, one of the things that drew me to this project is that we were asked not to really engage with the text. We were asked to offer an interpretation and a commentary, because I think as powerful as the Psalms are, I think there are many people that wouldn't consider going to a book like the Book of Psalms, let alone any biblical text or Siddur, during this time of challenge. And I would love people to perhaps find that comfort and consolation in those texts that I find so powerful. So I on the one hand, I'd like people to turn to Psalms to deal with the challenges. I think there's a lot valuable there because of that La Asok, because of that command to engage with it and not just take it necessarily at face value. But I'd like to see more people give it a chance. I'm not sure people are giving it a chance. I think we are, because we're scholars and leaders and we teach about it. But I don't know if the broader community is saying, wow, we're in a time of crisis. I think I'll go to the Book of Psalms. But I'd like to think a book like this would help people see, maybe there's something in there that would provide me comfort or would provide me a place to move forward during such a challenging time as we are in now.
Well, I think
I had a model of my parents who in difficult times would actually turn to the Book of Psalms, and they would read them, they would discuss them. Sometimes they also went to the Book of Job, but they were They read to each other, discussed, and filtered their own lives. So for me, it was natural when the pandemic came to start looking at Psalms for myself. And then I actually started a class that still is ongoing. And each week we just go a little further, and it's just an open discussion. And like Rafael, blessed memory, with his method, we are not really looking at commentators or for scholarship. We're just looking for our own hearts, and where do our own hearts measure against the text and against how we're managing through the coronavirus and the rest of life.
JB, I have to ask you, in your particular essay, where you talk about aiming, but you start off this essay with a story about elephants. And I mean, yes. You're reading this book about Psalms, and it's very serious, and the essays and the introductory essays, and Raphael's brilliant interpretation of the 23rd Psalm, which hopefully we'll get to it. And all of a sudden, you turn the page, and here come the elephants. Walk me through that story, and really the introduction to your essay. What's that about?
Well, when Rafael asked me to participate, once I latched onto Psalm 1, I really saw it as a psalm that helps us, that wants us not to be stuck. And the story of the elephants is really interesting because it is about the phenomenon that elephants that were somehow roped in one condition will, even when that condition no longer applies to them, they will just not leave, even though they can, because they'll feel like they are still stuck, even when they're not. And the story's told in a, as you said, in a sort of fun way, and it's, but it really is a metaphor, I think, for the possibility that all of us get stuck at some points in our lives. And I think a lot of us felt stuck at various times during this challenge of the pandemic, with the fact that many of us couldn't see loved ones and hold them like we normally would. And just so much has changed for all of us that I wanted to actually acknowledge that reality, that we are in a place that the world seems to be stuck or on hold in some ways. And our challenge that Rafael would want us to take on is how do we manage that challenge, and how do we figure out a way to experience joy and love and gratitude and hope and move towards that, and not just stay stuck in a place that we don't have to be in.
And I think in your essay also you unpack this concept of the Rasha, and kind of like tweaked it a little bit. Could you just unpack that a little bit? Because it has a lot of relevance to not only to the Psalm, but a lot of what we're dealing with, I think, right now.
So I think that one of the things that was hard for me when I wanted to sort of reconnect with the text is that so much of the text, the way it is traditionally translated and understood, is very judgmental. And I often hear people say to me that the God of the Tanakh is a judgmental God, or that religions are judgmental, so we don't want to engage. And the word Rasha actually comes from an ancient Semitic root just that means ill-regulated. It's a term for just non-regulation, and that is not judgmental at all. And actually, much of the language is not judgmental. We have to realize that the translations of the Bible were done in much later than the Hebrew Bible itself, and English is a different cultural way of expression than the biblical Hebrew, and so the Bible oftentimes is merely explaining a phenomenon, not judging the people who are experiencing the phenomenon. So Rasha just means somebody who is acting in a way that is not well regulated. It's often translated as evil, but evil is for many of us a moral judgment. But we're all unregulated sometimes. Sometimes if we speak too quickly without thought and without holding ourselves for a moment of mindfulness. And we've all done things that are not well regulated. We've all been driving while speeding or whatever it is. That means that we're just not regulating at our best, and it's not meant to be judgmental. And when you start to realize that the Bible doesn't really judge people, it really just helps us and guides us. And if we were to engage it as Cantor Rhoda just suggested it in the proper way, we would feel like our traditions, our literary traditions, aren't hurtful, but they just hold up for us so much that is helpful.
Rhoda, you are involved in CPE, clinical pastoral education. You're a Cantor, member of a clergy team, and you write a little bit, if I'm not mistaken, on Psalm 137 around trauma and dealing with that and interpreting that psalm. How did that come from your CPE and plus your practical cantoral life cycle engagement? How did you arrive at that particular point of view?
I'd say there were a couple things that pointed me in the direction. Certainly my experience in congregational life and doing pastoral care, offering pastoral care, seeing people partnering in the journey with people. That's one of the most sacred parts of our profession, I believe, is that we're welcomed in to people's lives at a time that is very tender and sacred. But I also came to it from my own experience in my life. I don't think anyone gets to be anyone's age past middle age, and we'll leave it there, without experiencing some level of disappointment and even trauma. I think it's a rare individual that doesn't get to a certain place in life and experience that. And so watching people through my own experiences of grappling through trauma, I found in this psalm a message of humanity and a lesson of how to travel through it. Also, as I talk about in my essay, one of the things about this psalm that has always struck me is liturgically, we ignore the most difficult aspects of it. And as a cantor who loves to dive into liturgy, and as somebody who's taken that love further into academic studies, the idea that we would just truncate the psalm because, we don't like that piece, we don't want to go there, that's not what we have to do when we live our lives through trauma. We can do that. We can truncate our emotions. We can put a stop. But if we take the psalm as a whole, it reminds us about the fullness of the journey and how to move through it. That's a phrase I use in the essay. That we're not overcoming it. We're not going to solve it. We might not find closure, but we can move through the fullness of all the emotions that come with it.
You know, you just triggered. So I got to ask both of you just to chime in on this, because really, you this is the great thing about looking at text, because it triggers so many different things. This idea of the truncated liturgy. Does liturgy really? I'm trying to formulate this question because you just triggered something about the idea of not being afraid. Not being afraid as clergy to use the text to pull back the curtain of raw emotion. Instead of having everything, I just want you to feel good. So much of synagogue life right now and prayer life is, just make me feel good. Don't bother me. Just sing a happy song, tell a happy story, and let me go to the oneg. As opposed to saying, this text really, as you're alluding to, it forces you to confront something that you don't sometimes want to do, but that's life. Could you just, guys, am I way off base here, or is it your experience? I think we sometimes dumb down liturgy as opposed to going to its truth. I'll throw it up, either one of you, whoever chimes in first. But somebody.
I'll say absolutely. I think that's exactly at the heart of it. And I often say, whether it's when I've given a sermon or offering an interpretation of liturgy, that someone might come up to me and say, that was challenging, good, right? I don't think our jobs is to make things easy for people. Sometimes it is. I mean, there's a place for that. But I think if we're honest about humanity and challenge, life is about being challenged. And Judaism has never said we should shy away from challenge, right? Asok is at the heart of Jewish study, right? So I agree with you 100%. Absolutely.
JB, go ahead.
I first of all just want to applaud Cantor Rhoda just for even choosing what is probably the most challenging psalm in the entire canon. It's really, it would have been easy just to choose another psalm, even one that brings up challenge, but Cantor Rhoda specifically chose one that is extremely challenging to us, not only for the trauma that it faces, but for the suggestion that seems to be offered that seems to be highly morally questionable at best. And she took that on beautifully. I loved her the way she got us to go through the journey of the psalm, but actually to choose our own journey. And I think that what she and you are both hinting to is that we who are professionals, as Cantor Rhoda says, we need to honor discomfort. We need to honor grief. We need to honor pain and suffering. And you don't honor it at all by ignoring it and just asking how the weather is or talking about something that's a little bit more pleasant. But we need to allow space for tears. We just read of the Joseph story, and Joseph was only able to come, early on, he refused to cry when he wanted to. And that led him to continue to have manipulation of his brothers. And only at the point where he actually did cry was he able to reconcile with them and become a kinder person. And so the pains that we have when we do get the wherewithal and strength and dignity to confront them as well as we can, that's where growth happens for us. And our job as professionals isn't just to hold hands, but also to help shepherd people through the difficult stages. But there's no shortcuts.
Do you think the Psalms, and do you think this book can be used for teenagers? Or is it just or do you have to have lived life a little bit and been around the block, so to speak, a couple of times before you really understand the nuances of Psalms? Because sometimes we just cheat our young people, just giving them, we don't challenge them enough. Could this book be used, let's say, in a confirmation class curriculum?
I'm not sure. I don't know how Cantor Rhoda feels. I'm going to have to sit with that question. I do think that some of the essays may be written, a little bit above the normal kind of reading that teenagers may be engaged in, at least at the high school I've been associated with. But I do think that it is good to use Psalms or to use the heady stuff of life with our teenagers. They're going through this pandemic as well.
Right.
And teenagers across the country experience all kinds of trauma. Teenagers of color have been have felt very much worried about how the criminal justice and policing affects their lives. And other teenagers are worried about a whole host of things. And if we only set up dances and fun things for them, I also don't think we're honoring their maturity and their capabilities.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to throw it because my impression sometimes is we do sometimes shortchange our own teenagers who their lives are as in many ways as challenged as ours, but in a very different perspective. And I think at the heart, some of them, especially those of the kids who come through our system, really want to know how this Judaism can speak to them much more, as opposed to just writing a nice bar mitzvah or participating in reading a paragraph at a confirmation service, but how it really affects them. So it just, as you were talking, it just occurred to me that, since both of you deal with young people in a variety of different ways, but
I was, if I can add, because I
go ahead.
I agree with Rabbi JB, and I don't think the entire book should just be a textbook for teenagers, but I think
no.
Right. But the process of looking at a psalm, taking into consideration historical context, personal experience you might have witnessed in a friend, I think that approach to text study would be a beautiful thing and should be something we introduce our teenagers to. I think too often, adults who do turn away from religious texts with, I think, Rabbi JB, you said that fear that it's going to be judgmental comes from the fact that we don't ask our young people to engage with the text in a full way. So it's taken for its perhaps, and not even a full understanding of that, right? So I think we should ask our teenagers to engage in it in the same way that we engaged in the texts for the book.
In Raphael's lengthy and challenging and brilliant interpretation of the 23rd Psalm, he wrote, "Our entire lifetime is life in the valley of the shadow," unquote. And I just want to throw that quote out to you to ask you to reflect on that. Our entire lifetime is life in the valley of the shadow. Your experience, your own rabbinate, cantorate, how true is that? Is that an apt metaphor? So I'll just throw it open to either one of you or both of you. Rhoda, you want to start off?
Sure. For me, the metaphor works because shadows move. The image that comes to mind when I think of shadows is not a stagnant one. And shadows are sometimes lighter and sometimes darker. And that idea that our life is a passageway through all various forms of shadows is very meaningful to me. So in that way, I think it's a beautifully apt metaphor. We often go through life expecting we're supposed to get to some peak and then we stay there. Shadows aren't like that, right? Shadows, they move and they're soft and they're rounded and they're ups and there's downs. And sometimes shadows come down to earth and sometimes they lift up. So in that sense, again, I just think it can be a beautifully apt metaphor for life.
JB?
Beautifully said, Cantor Rhoda. I fully agree. I don't know if I had really thought much had thought of it in that way, and that Rafael so beautifully described. And I think that I love it. I remember Ernest Becker's book, The Denial of Death, and how denying the fact that our time is limited, right? And the psalmist elsewhere says, our lifespan is limited, right? 70 years, and if granted the strength, 80 is how the, and I think that the psalmist wanted us to realize that there is a temporality, and we shouldn't wait till we're, in the latter stages to realize what's happening. But I think it gives us better perspective. I think the other thing about the Valley of the Shadow is, while Cantor Rhoda aptly focused on the shadows part, there's also the valley part, and valleys are very verdant and lush, and that's where they're full of sustenance and foods, and they're very pleasurable places. So that the valley, we live in the valley of the shadow, not the shadow of the valley. So I think that with the emphasis that we are in the valley, we know that shadows can come and go, and as Cantor said, they can lighten, they can darken, but they aren't actually the reality necessarily. They're something that we are with. The valley is is our life. That is our reality. So I think that we have the opportunity to make the most of our lives and live a life of dignity and worthiness and joy, even with shadows that come and go and provide challenge.
Beautiful.
Sure. In sometimes to just piggyback on this, the shadow comes with sunlight.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the themes that run through some of the other essays, Shearer and Dale's, is the idea of hope, the idea of forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a passage and a sense, a theme towards the end of gratitude.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd like you to just, from your experience and your study of the Psalms and your essay, but from your own neshama, this idea of gratitude seems to be more and more being discussed right now in the midst of the pandemic. The idea of Psalms in the key of healing, which is the title of the book. The transition, the temporality that both of you have alluded to. But in the end, is there something about this idea of the Jewish tradition that says, despite the fact that we're here for the blink of an eye, this value of being grateful, which is, I guess, why we say Modeh Ani Lefanecha every morning, because we are grateful, and we have the Nisim B'chol Yom in the morning service, because we are grateful. Could you just, as a sort of like a coda to our conversation, both of you in your own way, just speak to these ideas and themes of hope and forgiveness, but mostly gratitude. JB, what do you think?
I think they're all midot. They're all character strengths. They're all virtues that we have within us, but they need to be nurtured and cultivated. And some of us might be born with a little bit more of an aptitude for one or another. But I think that we all have the great possibilities for forgiveness, forgiving ourselves, forgiving others, for gratitude. But they are like with the rest of our muscles. In order to become more adept at them, we have to use them more. So I think that the words of Modeh Ani and Nisim B'chol Yom that you point to are reminders that we need to use our muscles. They don't, just by reciting the words, we don't use them. And so we've been doing a lot. I've been doing a lot of with myself and asking others to find a daily gratitude practice, and whether it is as simple as writing 2-3 things that you're grateful for at the end of the day, and then the next day write 2 more, but they have to be different, and then after a week or 10 days look back at them, or to have a gratitude journal, or to do there's many possible ways to mark our gratitude so we can be more thoughtful about them and grow in a sense of gratitude. But I think that having that gratitude toward life really actually helps us, if we're good at it, to manage most of the travails of our lives a lot more easily and gracefully.
Oh, thank you. Rhoda?
So I'll add, and I love what Rabbi JB said about this idea that some people have a facility towards gratitude than perhaps others. And I think that is where liturgy comes in hand. I often, when I'm teaching about liturgy, bring out the analogy to going to the gym. Nobody complains. You go to the gym once, like the first time in 3 months, and you're going to be sore. No one complains. You might complain about it, but you're expected. You get it, right? How many people do we know they go to synagogue once a year and they complain about it, how uncomfortable it is? Because it is a practice. It's a practice. And I think the sages who put together our prayer book, both the historic ones and the more modern ones that have created our modern readings of our prayer book, know this and put in writing things that we may or may not agree with in the moment that we say them, but it's still good practice because it develops that muscle to help us be more grateful for the things in life that we might more might be prone to take for granted. One of my favorite prayers is, of course, that one that we say that thanks God for all the holes in our bodies and that they function correctly, right? You don't have to necessarily believe in God to appreciate that prayer. It's a lot about appreciating the human body and its functions when we are well, right? So to me, that's a great example of how liturgy can help us stay grounded to that ability to be grateful, especially in times of challenge when we can't do the things that we really want to do in our lives that might be beyond our homes and our intimate spaces.
Rabbi J.V. Sachs of Congregation Hayam in Ventura and Cantor Rhoda Harrison from M'kor Shalom in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. I'm deeply grateful for you giving of your time to just walk us through a little bit of your own personal beliefs, but also to give honor to the memory of Rafael. Again, the book, Psalms in the Key of Healing, an interfaith text study for clergy, chaplains, and people living with illness. JB Rhoda, thank you very, very much. I appreciate this, and I know that in some place, Rafael's neshama is smiling and probably saying thank you very much. And you give honor to his memory and to his life. And Rafael, rest in peace. So thank you, Rhoda. Thank you, JB. To all of you, thank you for watching and listening to today's edition of Seekers of Meaning, the podcast of Jewish Sacred Aging. We're now available through the Roku app or plug-in or whatever Roku is, which I am struggling to understand, but we appreciate you joining us. And again, we welcome your comments and suggestions. You can reach me at Rabbi Address at jewishsacredaging.com. And if you'd like to help support our work and these podcasts, you go to the website, jewishsacredaging.com. We'd appreciate it if, for a tax-free donation, you click on the donate button. We're very, very grateful for that. Seekers of Meaning is produced at the Broadcast Center of Lubeck Media Companies in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. And a big shout out to our producer, Steve Lubeck. I want to thank you. I'm your host, Rabbi Richard Address. I look forward to greeting you on our next Seekers of Meaning podcast and TV for Jewish Sacred Aging. Shalom, stay safe, stay healthy. Rafael, Toda Rabah. Shalom.